everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of the Lizzie Borden case. Now before I get started, this video is not sponsored, but I do want to share with you something really cool that I got on Amazon 4 days ago. Two things really cool that I got on Amazon 4 days ago, because I always get comments on Instagram about where I get my scrunchies from. Usually I buy them from Old Navy or, places in the mall, and they're kind of pricey because it's like $6 or $7 for one or two. But I just searched on Amazon a couple of days ago because Bella's been taking my scrunchies. She likes to put them on her wrist and use them in her hair. So I said, I need to get more scrunchies. They've got to be cheaper on Amazon. And I found the best scrunchies ever on Amazon. I'm wearing one right now. I have like a whole bag of them. See? Scrunchies, all different colors. You got red ones, you got gray ones, you got blue ones. Purple, royal blue. Oh my God, I could take like a bath, bright red, purple, all different kinds of purple, green. This one might have matched better with what I'm wearing today, but it was at the bottom of the bag, so I didn't see it. Oh, this one would have been perfect. Anyways, these scrunchies are awesome, and I am not getting paid by Amazon or the scrunchie company to share them with you, but I do have a link, and if you want to use my link and go on Amazon and buy them, it does give me some credit, which is awesome, and they're really cool. They're nice. They're like really good. You can wear them on your wrist or in your hair. They're not too tight. They're not too loose. And I like scrunchies for your hair better than regular elastics because they don't damage your hair, especially these velvety ones. The next thing I want to tell you about is about these awesome socks I got. It is freezing here in New York, freezing. And my feet are cold anyways because I have really bad circulation. And I like socks that are warm, but not too warm where your feet get sweaty. And I don't like anything tight around my ankles or my calves where it starts to feel like it's cutting off my circulation. So I searched forever. I bought a couple socks that I did not like and I ended up sending back, but these ones are everything. So I got them in gray. When they arrived, I put them on, and immediately after putting them on, I went on Amazon and ordered them in blue because they're awesome. I think you get 3 pairs for $20, but let me show you really quick. Don't judge me that I am still wearing sweatpants because I sit here for like 3 hours and wearing real pants is uncomfortable. So these are like, they can go all the way up here, or you can slouch them down, which I do, but they're like really stretchy and knitted so they don't cut off your circulation. You can wear them over your pants. You can wear them as like boot socks. You can wear them under your pants, whatever you want to do, but they're super comfortable. They're super warm, but not too warm. My feet have never sweat because they breathe. And they also are cool because they're versatile. You can like slouch them down, or you can pull them all the way up. You can put your boots on and wear them just so they show a little bit over the boot. I love them, so I'll place that link in there too. If you are interested in any channel news, because I know people sometimes aren't, and they're like, why do you talk about all this stuff before the video? Stay tuned till the end. I'll talk about it with you at the end so nobody can complain. And for everybody who's reached out to me on Twitter and Instagram and via email the past couple of days, I've been really sick with a stomach flu I think this is the 5th day now. I am feeling much better, but still iffy. I feel like I haven't eaten in 4 days, even though I'm very hungry. I can't keep anything down. So hopefully it's at the end of it, and more hopefully the kids don't get it, because that would be absolute misery for everybody concerned. Let's get started on the video. Okay, so where we left off in part 1 was the day of Andrew and Abby's funeral. The mayor of Fall River goes to the Borden house, and he tells Lizzie and Emma he'd appreciate it if they could stay inside and not really leave to avoid the public eye. This prompts Lizzie to ask him if anybody in the household is a suspect in the murders. He kind of dances around this for a little bit. He doesn't want to directly answer, but she's persistent and she's very direct. And eventually he says to them, yes, actually, you, Lizzie, you're a suspect. And she defiantly tells him, well, I'm ready to go at any time. So she's kind of like, you think I'm guilty? Take me away, put the cuffs on me. The Bordens were killed on a Thursday. And Alice, Lizzie's friend, she remained at the house until the following Monday. On Sunday morning, she got up, ate breakfast, and then she left the house for a little bit because she had some errands to run. She returned to the house about noon. When she came in, Lizzie and Emma were both in the kitchen. Emma was standing by the sink, and Lizzie was standing by the wood-burning fireplace, and she had some kind of blue fabric in her hands that she was ripping up and feeding into the fire. And her sister asked her, "Lizzie, what are you doing?" And Lizzie responded, "Oh, I'm just burning this old thing. It's got paint all over it." So she said that she was wearing a dress and she had rubbed up against some fresh paint and the dress had paint on it, and so she was burning the dress. And Alice was severely disturbed by this because it looked bad. Alice leaves the kitchen. She doesn't want to be around this when it's happening. Later, she comes back into the kitchen and Lizzie is still tearing up this garment and putting it into the fire. Alice said she could see some blue fabric that was in a cupboard that the door was open to, and it was kind of shoved in among the pots and pans, and Lizzie was still ripping this other garment, which also was blue, and putting it in the fire. So Alice told her friend, "I wouldn't let anybody see me doing that if I was you," and Lizzie didn't respond. That same Monday, the police returned to the Borden home for another search. They searched the house very thoroughly again. They started in the barn, and then they came into the house. They started in the attic and went all the way down until they ended up in the cellar. They had already taken from the house prior 2 axes and a hatchet, but they were looking for something else because it didn't appear that any of those other weapons or tools had anything on it that might be suspicious, and they're looking for a murder weapon. But in this search, they found another hatchet, or at least part of one. This hatchet had its wooden handle basically broken off. There was just a little part of the wooden handle left, and it was jagged, as if somebody had basically broken it in two somehow. Something else that stood out to the police about this hatchet was the blade of it had some sort of ashy white substance on both sides, which gave it the appearance of being old. But it was located in a box with other tools that didn't look at that at all or have any of that substance on it, so they took it into evidence. While some officers are searching the house, others are interviewing Alice, Lizzie, and Emma again. Now, Lizzie and Emma had already given their interviews to the police that day, but Alice was being interviewed, and the police asked her if she believed that all the dresses that were present the day of the murders were still present in the Borden home. And she said yes, against her better judgment. She was torn. She didn't know if she should throw her friend under the bus or remain loyal. So she remained loyal, but later it nagged at her and it bothered her. So she went to Lizzie and she went to Emma, and she told them she didn't really feel comfortable with how she'd lied to the police. She told them she was afraid. She said, "Lizzie, burning that dress was the worst thing you could have done because the police asked me about your dresses today." She felt like she needed to come clean and tell the truth. And Lizzie responded to her, "Oh, why did you let me do it? Why didn't you tell me?" I mean, I don't think that your friend has to tell you it looks bad you're burning clothes a couple days after your parents are found dead in your home. I don't feel like she needs to tell you that, because if she has the common sense to put 2 and 2 together, I'm sure it had already occurred to Lizzie. Emma stepped in at this point and said to Alice, "Yes, we agree. We both agree, Lizzie and I, you should tell the police what you know, because Lizzie's not responsible for this. There's nothing that can hurt us. We're not worried, so absolutely you should tell the police the truth." Now, something to note is when the police had gone through Lizzie's closet and Emma's closet a couple days prior to this, they had looked at all their dresses, and not one of these dresses had paint splattered on it. And it was something they would notice because, of course, they were looking for blood spatter. So they would be looking closely at the skirts of the dresses, at the bodices, to see if there was any sign of blood. And they would have noticed paint. I believe they would have noticed paint if they were looking for blood. Alice did fess up to the police about what she had seen, and they thanked her. But what they didn't tell her was they really didn't need her statement at this point because they had enough to arrest Lizzie. But they didn't just yet. What they did first was they held an inquest from August 9th to 11th. An inquest is basically a hearing to determine if there's enough evidence to put somebody on trial for the murders. During this inquest, several people are questioned, including Bridget, John Morse, and Lizzie herself. one of the first people to testify was Bridget Sullivan. Now, the police were really impressed with her testimony because she had a very clear and concise timeline. Her story never changed. She knew exactly where she was, when she was there, what she was doing, and it never wavered. She didn't have to think about it. She didn't have to consider it. It just came easily, which signified to them that she was being 100% honest. John Morse also had a very, very specific and detailed alibi about where he was that day. It was airtight. He had an answer for every place that he was, what he was doing, and who he was talking to, and some people believed it was almost too detailed. He remembered small things like what the number of the bus was that he took, and the names of 3 men he spoke to while he was on the bus. Just little things that you wouldn't think somebody might remember in passing, but he remembered. So it was almost like he knew he would need an alibi, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Either way, he had an alibi, so he certainly wasn't present at the time of the murders. The medical examiner determined that Abby Borden had died probably between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., but most likely between 9 and 9:30, and that Andrew Borden had died nearly an hour and a half later. Bridget Sullivan that day was questioned for hours, but like I said, her story never changed. Her testimony never wavered, and after they talked to her, they wanted to talk to Lizzie immediately. So they left the courthouse, they went to pick Lizzie up and brought her back to the courthouse, where they brought her to the second floor, put her on the stand, and questioned her for several hours. The main purpose of wanting to question Lizzie so soon after questioning Bridget was because they wanted to see if her story and her timeline would match up with Bridget's. And not only that, would her story and timeline match up with her own initial interview with the police and what she said happened at that point. She was interviewed by District Attorney Hosea Knowlton, and the first question he asks is, tell me what happened that morning. Once again, we're not only establishing the timeline for everybody in the courtroom, but we're also trying to see if her story is going to match with Bridget's, and if her story is going to match with what she had originally told the police. Not only does it not match up with Bridget's, but it doesn't even match her original story. Lizzie said she'd woken up last, and by the time she'd come downstairs, everybody had already eaten breakfast. She said Abby was dusting. Okay, so far so good. We're in familiar territory here. She said she couldn't remember if she had eaten breakfast that morning. She said she'd been feeling sick the night before, so maybe she had half of a banana, and she knew that there was some molasses cookies in the house, and she might have eaten a couple of those. Which makes me wonder, not that I understand it's hard to remember these mundane things about your day, but 2 people were murdered that day, so that typically sharpens people's memories about what happened. And it's not long after the 4th that she's being questioned. This is 5 days later. How do you not remember what you had for breakfast the morning your father was killed? I feel like that is something I would remember, especially if they had been molasses cookies, because those are good. She said Andrew came down from his room, he went into town, and the 3 women went about their day and their chores. Lizzie said she took out an ironing board and set it up on the table, and then she put her irons on the stove to heat up. Now, this also did not match up with Bridget's story, because Bridget said that Lizzie didn't take out the ironing board until Andrew Borden had already come home. Given the timeline with John Morse leaving the house at about 8:45, Lizzie coming downstairs at about 8:50, and Andrew leaving the house at about 9 a.m., this would put Lizzie in the kitchen around 9 a.m. And Knowlton asks her, how long did this task take? And she says, I don't know. And this would have been the opportunity for her to give herself an alibi, because this is pretty much the timeline when Abby most likely was killed. So between 9 and 10 a.m., the best that Lizzie can offer is she was going to start ironing. She put the ironing board out, started getting her irons hot. They weren't hot, so she put them on the stove to heat, and she doesn't know how long this task took or how long she was doing it for. So this was Lizzie's opportunity to provide an alibi. If she could have said, oh, I was talking to Bridget, or I walked out to get the milk, or I was speaking with the neighbor lady, or if she could have even said, I was ironing from probably 9:15 till about 10 a.m., if she could have given any kind of concrete proof, not even proof, just an awareness of where she was between 9 and 9:30 a.m. when Abby Borden would have been killed, she could have at least had a leg to stand on, but she didn't know. Now, this is also around the time she's alone in the house. The only two people in the house would have been Abby and Lizzie, because Bridget was outside washing the windows, and she'd been seen by several neighbors and passerbyers doing so at this time. She was not in the house. It went from bad to worse when Knowlton asked Lizzie where she was when her father arrived back home that morning. So Andrew would have arrived back home around 10:45 a.m. that morning, only about an hour and 45 minutes after he'd left because he wasn't feeling well. So 10:45, where were you? She says she was in the kitchen reading the Harper magazine before she went out to the barn. This leaves her pretty much from about 9:15 till 10:45, sitting in the kitchen waiting for some irons to heat up and reading an old magazine. Lizzie saying she was in the kitchen with the magazine when her father came home contradicts what Bridget said about Lizzie being upstairs and laughing when her father couldn't get into the house. So either Lizzie was lying or Bridget was lying. And who had more motivation to lie, really? And if Lizzie had been upstairs at the time when her father had come home, this would be about 10:45, that would put her upstairs after Abby had died. And Lizzie's room was right next door to the guest room that Abby had been killed in. So she was upstairs. She surely would have seen Abby's body laying on the floor of the guest room. When Knowlton asks her if she was sure that she'd been in the kitchen, Lizzie responds, "I'm not sure if I was in the kitchen or the dining room." He presses her further and asks if Lizzie had been upstairs in her room before her father returned. And she says, "Yes, I did go up for about 5 minutes. I had to sew a little bit of tape onto a garment, but I was only upstairs for like 5 minutes. Knowlton asks her again, "So you were upstairs when your father got home?" And she says, "No." Knowlton then switches gears and he starts asking Lizzie about the locks on the door, why her father couldn't have gotten in, can the locks only be fastened and locked from the inside, things like that. And then he goes right back to questioning where she was when Andrew Borden came home. He says, "So you were upstairs when your father got home?" And she goes, "I'm not sure, but I think so." So she's saying, no, I wasn't upstairs. I came back downstairs before he got home. Then he's like, "So you were upstairs when he got home?" And she's like, "I'm not sure, but I think so." Knowlton then asks her, "Well, what were you doing upstairs?" And she goes, "I already told you. I was sewing a bit of tape onto a garment, and I brought some clean clothes up to put away, but I came right back down." She then goes on to say that she was coming down the stairs as Bridget was letting her father inside. And Knowlton comes for her. He's like, "Listen, you keep changing your story, whether you're upstairs or downstairs when your father got home. Which is it? Have you forgotten?" And she responds, "I don't know what I have said. I've answered so many questions and I am so confused I don't know one thing from another. I am telling you just as nearly as I know how." Lizzie changes her story again and says, "No, I'm sure I was downstairs." She says the time she's recollecting where she was upstairs was another day and another person coming to the house completely. Bridget was letting somebody else into the house when Lizzie was coming down the stairs, and she just forgot or mistook one event for the next. Lizzie said the last time she saw her stepmother was when Abby was in the dining room dusting. And at that point, Abby had told her she had gotten a note from a sick friend. She had to go out, but she was going to be getting dinner while she was out. And did Lizzie want anything? And Lizzie said no. That was the last time she saw her. And Knowlton asked her, "Did you see her go out?" And Lizzie said no. And Knowlton's like, "Well, you didn't see her at any point after that. She's not just going to be dusting in her dusting clothes with her hair covered and then leave the house. She's going to go upstairs to her room to change. And from where you said you were in the kitchen, it would have been impossible for her to go into her room without passing you. It would have been impossible for her to come back downstairs for her room to leave the house without passing you. So did you see her?" And Lizzie's like, "No, I didn't see her." And he's like, "Well, where did you think she was then? Because you didn't see her leave the house. You didn't see her go upstairs to her room to get dressed. You didn't see her come back downstairs to leave the house. Where did you think she was?" Lizzie said she believed that Abby had been in the guest bedroom, that she had told Lizzie she needed to make it up for John that night, and that she probably thought she was either there or out of the house or in her own room. Knowlton's like, "Yeah, but she still would have had to leave these rooms, come downstairs to go up to other rooms. She would have to leave these rooms, come downstairs to leave the house. You did not see her at all. Do you not think that's odd?" And Lizzie responds, "Well, unless she came by while I was in my room for a couple of minutes." And Knowlton basically says, like, she's upstairs making up the guest bedroom, but she's not going to be doing that for 2.5 hours. So why did you think she might have been in the guest bedroom for so long? Where did you think she could have gone? And Lizzie says, "Well, I thought maybe she probably went into her own room to make up her own bed." And Knowlton says, "She would have had to pass you, right?" And Lizzie's like, "Unless she did it in a couple of minutes, I was upstairs in my own room." But something Knowlton doesn't say to her, which I want to mention, is the guest bedroom was right next to Lizzie's room. So if Abby left the guest bedroom to go downstairs to go into her own room up the other set of stairs, Lizzie still would have heard her walk out. She would have heard the guest bedroom door close. She would have heard somebody descending the stairs. She claims she heard none of this. She didn't say she heard any of it, at least. So that's just something I probably would have mentioned to her. And then Knowlton says, okay, so you said you were in your room for like 5 minutes. So you're saying Abby Borden left the guest bedroom conveniently at the same time you were in your room. And she went up to her own room to make her bed and get ready to leave the house to go see a sick friend. And she came downstairs and left the house within the 2 to 5 minute period that you were in your room. So that's why you missed her. And Lizzie responds really vaguely and says, well, sometimes she's in her room for a long time and sometimes she's in her room for a short time. Hosea Knowlton then asks her about the note that Abby Borden received from a sick friend that morning asking for help. And he's like, do you know where that note is? Do you know who wrote the note? Do you know where she went? And Lizzie responds to all of these questions, no. I think at one point she realized she was digging herself a very deep hole. So she just began answering all the questions with as little detail as she could. One-word answers, or I don't know, I'm not sure, I don't know. And this annoys the DA to no extent because he asks her a very simple question. Was Bridget washing the windows that morning? And Lizzie says, I don't know, even though she had testified earlier that she saw Bridget bringing up window cleaning supplies. She says, I don't know. And he's like, listen, lady, I'm trying to help right now. I'm trying to establish a timeline for this day. And you keep giving me these answers you don't know. It's pretty well established fact that Bridget was outside cleaning the windows. She was seen by many people. How do you not know? And Lizzie's like, well, I knew she cleaned the outside windows, but if she cleaned the inside windows, I don't know, because I was sitting in the kitchen the whole time and she never cleaned those windows. So basically, the police kind of figured that it was almost impossible for an intruder to come into that home and kill Abby and Andrew Borden. One, the house was always locked up like Fort Knox, extremely, extremely secure. So securely, in fact, that Andrew Borden had a hard time accessing his own home that morning. So they didn't really think that anybody had come into the house. They also thought it was suspicious the amount of time between when Abby was killed and when Andrew was killed. It didn't seem like somebody who just came in a rage and a rampage and killed 2 people. Nothing was missing, nothing was taken, nothing was disturbed. Just Abby killed and Andrew killed. It seemed personal. Additionally, this attacker would have had to have hid themselves somewhere in the house and concealed themselves from Lizzie and Bridget for an hour and a half between when they killed Abby and when they killed Andrew. And Lizzie had been upstairs after Abby had been killed, so why didn't this attacker kill her too? Why just Abby and Andrew? And who comes into a house and kills somebody and then lays in wait for another hour and a half for somebody to come home to kill when they don't even know that person's coming home because he didn't typically come home at that time? There was no indication that this was an enemy of Andrew, an enemy of Abby, or just a random stranger who was looking for something to take because nothing was taken. It was personal. So who personally wanted Abby and Andrew dead? Not to mention, the attacker would have had to have killed Abby and Andrew and then escaped through the screen door because the front door was locked and it was still locked from the inside after Andrew had been killed. So unless Bridget or Lizzie had re-locked the door behind the attacker, they couldn't have left from there. They would have had to have left through the screen door. And Lizzie allegedly was back there in the barn and she was looking out the window that looked upon the house and she could have seen somebody leaving or exiting. And she claims she didn't see anybody. She only saw the screen door hanging open. Also, there's a ton of neighbors in this area. A ton of neighbors to the point where people did see Bridget outside washing the windows. You've got the nosy next door neighbor who saw Bridget running back from Dr. Bowen's office upset, who saw Bridget washing the windows, who saw Lizzie standing by the screen door because she was watching. Nobody saw any assailant leave through the screen door and run away from the house covered in blood. The violence, the multiple strikes, when 1 or 2 would have done the job, suggested a deep rage. Also, the only person who ever really suggested that Andrew had enemies that were bad enough to mean him harm or to kill him was Lizzie. People said in town, yeah, Andrew wasn't, the favorite person that everybody wanted to be friends with, but they respected him as a businessman. They knew he was shrewd, and most people had learned not to get into business with him unless they wanted to be completely upfront and honest. Nobody said that anybody had ever threatened him, that anybody had ever been drunk at a pub one night and said, "That Andrew Borden, I'm gonna hit him with a hatchet in the face." Nobody ever said anything like that besides Lizzie, who tried to plant this in people's heads. And no one had the motive that Lizzie did. She was in her 30s, considered a spinster, living with her father, no prospects. She wasn't allowed to live the glamorous life she wanted. He had money, but wouldn't let them spend it on the things that she wanted to spend it on. She envied all her cousins and families who lived on the hill and would have glamorous parties and lived in beautiful homes, were able to go to the theater and to galleries and be a part of society and culture. She wanted that. She was also very jealous and resentful of her stepmother. Andrew had just gifted her stepmother the house that was for her stepmother's family. And Lizzie and Emma clearly had a problem with this. They had a problem with him being so stingy with his money, yet seemingly so open to spend it on people that weren't blood. She felt trapped and frustrated with her circumstances. She's a young woman. She can't make it on her own outside of her father's house. She can't go really get a job and make her own money, at least not the type of money she wants to make. And she felt trapped. But in the event of Andrew and Abby's deaths, all his money would be transferred to Lizzie Borden and Emma Borden. On the last day of the inquest, August 11th, Lizzie Borden was arrested on 2 counts of murder, and her sister Emma sobbed in the courtroom. But Lizzie, once again, didn't flinch. She didn't bat an eye. And when they asked her if she wanted the arrest warrant read aloud to her, she refused. She was booked and sent to Taunton Jail, which was a nearby town, because Fall River didn't have a separate holding facility for men and women, which shows you how much women were arrested in Fall River, Massachusetts at that time. Once Lizzie was behind bars, her tough exterior faded. She began sobbing and hyperventilating so much to the point that the matron at the jail had to call in Dr. Bowen to come help her. But it wasn't over for Lizzie Borden. Don't feel bad for Lizzie Borden. She was not going to go down without a fight. With the massive amount of money that had been transferred to her sister's name, Lizzie and Emma hired the dream team of lawyers. For the 1800s, this was the O.J. Simpson trial of the 1800s. It was highly, highly publicized, complete media frenzy, newspapers writing all sorts of things, publishing outright brazen lies just to sell papers. And the legal team of Lizzie Borden was, famous. They were well known, well respected, and known to be very effective at getting their clients off. You had Andrew Jackson Jennings, who gave the opening statements at Lizzie's trial. Melvin Ohio Adams, who cross-examined all 22 of the state's witnesses. And last but not least, George Dexter Robinson, who was the principal attorney on Lizzie's defense team. George Robinson was Harvard educated and served on the Massachusetts State Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives before going on to become governor of Massachusetts. We will also talk a little bit more about George Dexter Robinson momentarily. The trial didn't start till almost a year later, June of 1893. Lizzie would be judged by a jury of her peers, 12 men, because women hadn't begun actively participating in serving on juries at this point. Even though it technically was legal, it wasn't common. There was also 3 male judges who presided over the trial. Chief Justice Albert Mason, Justice Caleb Blodgett, and Justice Justin Dewey. Justice Justin Dewey. These 3 judges made some decisions in this case that I believe affected the outcome greatly. The prosecution would have to make their case without the admittance of Lizzie's inquest testimony at all. So all the changing stories, all the contradictions, none of it was allowed to be put forth to the jury. The reason for this was because Lizzie had been being dosed with high levels of morphine from the day that she found her father dead. Dr. Bowen had been giving her the morphine to calm her nerves, and when she was put on trial at the inquest, he gave her a higher dose of morphine that day because she was suspected of murdering her parents, she was stressed out, she was having a mental breakdown, so he upped her morphine dose by quite a bit. So she was heavily under the influence when she testified at her inquest, and because of this, her statement was completely thrown out. They would also have to make the case without the testimony of pharmacist Eli Benz. This was the pharmacist that Lizzie tried to buy the prussic acid from. This was thrown out because it was determined that since the Bordens had been hacked to death and not poisoned, it had nothing to do with it. The means of death was too different from poisoning, so therefore it had nothing to do with it. Never mind that the Bordens had been feeling sick and throwing up for days before they died. Never mind that possibly because poisoning is something a woman is more likely to do to kill somebody than to bash them to death with an axe. They may have been her first effort, but when she was unable to buy the prussic acid, she just used what she had. Never mind any of that. It was thrown out. And something so crazy happened. The prosecution exhumed Abby and Andrew's bodies. They took their flesh off and brought their skulls into court to show the jury the wounds. These people had been hit so hard with this instrument, whatever it was, that their skulls had these deep gashes. And I think they brought these skulls in for a sort of, shock factor. And apparently Lizzie fainted and all proceedings had to be put on hold while the sensitive, weak woman was, brought back to life. They had the smelling salts under her nose, like, "Wake up, Lizzie, wake up." And she spent the rest of the time while the skulls were on the table and the testimony was being given, hiding behind a fan. And everybody was watching her to make sure that, her weak constitution would hold up. The vapors are real, man. Many people did take the stand: Alice Russell, Dr. Bowen, Adelaide Churchill, and the matron from the jail where Lizzie had been staying until her trial. This woman's name was Hannah Reagan, and she testified that while Lizzie was staying there, her sister Emma visited her, and she overheard a heated conversation between the two of them. Allegedly, Lizzie said to her sister, "Emma, you gave me away, haven't you?" Emma responded to her, "No, Lizzie," to which Lizzie replied, "You have, and I will let you see. I won't give in 1 inch. Dr. Edward S. Woods, a blood stain and poison expert from Harvard, testified about the contents of the stomachs of Abby and Andrew that day. He said Abby had about 11 ounces of partially digested food and liquid inside of her stomach. This showed her last meal had been about 2 to 3 hours prior to her death. Andrew's stomach contents showed that the digestion process was further advanced, with most of the food being already expelled into the intestine. That suggested his last meal was about 3.5 to 4.5 hours before his death. Contents of their stomachs showed no signs of prussic acid, or for that matter, any other poison, and Woods had also tested the milk that was in the house that day to see if the milk had been poisoned, and there was no sign of poison in the milk either. A claw hammer, 2 axes, and the broken-handled hatchet that had been found in the cellar, those were all tested as well for blood and any kind of other evidence that could be found on them. There was no sign of blood on any of these, and the small piece of hair that had been found on the hatchet was determined to be 100% absolutely an animal's, probably a cow's. The only blood that was found on the underskirt that Lizzie had given the police. It was about 6 inches up from the bottom, and it was small, the size of a pinhead, but it was determined to be human blood. I read through all this testimony, and I read through all the trial transcripts, and I couldn't find anywhere where Woods said or he was asked whether the blood was fresh or old, which is the first thing I feel like I would have asked, because if it was fresh, then it meant something. You can usually tell when blood's fresh on a garment, or if it was on the garment and then the garment was washed. There's ways of telling that. I don't know if there was in the 1800s, but I also think you could tell if the blood was older. It may have been, brown. If it was fresh and the garment hadn't been washed yet, it might have still been bright red. So I'm not sure why that wasn't asked or answered, but that's just my take on it. The defense cross-examined Dr. Woods and asked, could it be menstrual blood? And Dr. Woods was like, yeah, obviously it could be menstrual blood, which I'm over here thinking, like, you got a drop of blood on your underskirt the size of a pinhead, and we're going to say that's menstrual blood? I mean, it could be. I would say it was more likely she had just accidentally cut herself somewhere or scratched herself, and the blood from that came. But we're going to say it's menstrual blood? I don't know what kind of light periods that Lizzie Borden has, but let's move on. Dr. Woods said that all traces of blood could have been washed off of these instruments. However, It would have taken a much more deep and thorough cleansing. It could have been done with cold water, but it couldn't have been done really quickly. Because of all the angles and the grooves on the handles and on the heads of these weapons, blood would have settled into these tiny little crevices and would have still been able to be found. And there was no sign of blood even in the small crevices. So it would have taken a more thorough cleaning, right? Maybe a more thorough cleaning that Lizzie could have accomplished when she went down to the cellar late at night and crouched by the sink for a little while. What was she doing? Maybe she was scrubbing the crap out of a hatchet. Maybe that's why they found the hatchet after they'd already searched the house, and maybe that's why it looked like it didn't belong with the other tools it was with. I'm just saying. This, of course, led the defense to suggest that maybe the hatchet, which had the broken handle, maybe the broken handle was broken because there was blood on the handle, and the person who was trying to get rid of the blood thought it would be easier to break the handle off rather than clean it because it was wood and wood would absorb. I do think there is something about that hatchet. There was a ton of objections that came up when this hatchet was being discussed, more than really any other place in the trial. It was hard to read because there were so many objections and you didn't know who was talking. The defense attorney, the prosecution, the judge who was trying to rule on the objections, the witness who was trying to answer the questions, but they were being objected to. Tons of objections on this hatchet. So it's almost like you protest too much. The defense closed by saying basically Lizzie had no motive to do this, and the wounds on Abby and Andrew showed that it was somebody who would have had to have been stronger than Lizzie was and more proficient with an axe or a hatchet than Lizzie was known to be. They said there was 2 witnesses who had also seen her leaving the barn at 11:03 a.m. when she said she was leaving the barn, which gave her an alibi of being in the barn like she said she was. Furthermore, the murder weapon had never been found, and there was no physical evidence that you could find or point to that connected Lizzie Borden to these murders. The prosecution spoke to Bridget's testimony and how it was pretty obvious to anybody who wanted to look that every time Bridget left Lizzie alone, somebody died, right? So the first time Bridget goes outside to clean the windows, Abby dies. The second time Bridget goes upstairs to rest, Andrew dies. And this note that had been allegedly sent to the house calling Abby away, where was it? It was the ghost note, the phantom note. The only proof that it existed was Lizzie saying it did. It wasn't found in the trash can at the Borden home. It wasn't found on Abby's person in her pocket. It wasn't found anywhere. They put an ad in the paper offering $5,000 for anybody who could come forward with information about this note. The person who sent it, perhaps, the sick friend, or maybe even the messenger who delivered it. $5,000? That's a big amount of money. Nobody came forward. Nobody knew anything about the note. And if you ask me, that is because this note did not exist. Everybody in Fall River was reading the papers like crazy, all the time, trying to figure out what was going on with this trial, what was going on with these murders. If there had been a messenger or a friend of Abby's who had been reading the paper and saw that they were looking for this note, they would have come forward immediately. No question. This note did not exist. And to me, that is one of the main points that makes Lizzie guilty. The prosecution said she did have motive. She was the only one who had motive. She hated Abby. She made that clear to everybody. And she hated how her father spent his money or didn't spend it. So she cut them both down and solved both her problems in one day. And I mean, to be fair, this is a Casey Anthony kind of case. It looks bad. It kind of makes sense. Yet there's really no evidence linking the two together. And you've got this jury of 12 men sitting there looking at poor Lizzie Borden, this little female, a member of the weaker sex, waving herself behind her fan. Oh my goodness, I can't believe this happened to father and poor Mrs. Borden. They didn't see her as somebody that could take an axe or a hatchet and chop 2 people to death. And I believe the defense had another little trick up their sleeve. Justice Justin Dewey, one of the judges who was presiding over the trial, who would decide what evidence was allowed in and what was not, he'd been appointed to the bench by George Dexter Robinson, the very same George Dexter Robinson that had served as governor of Massachusetts and that now served as Lizzie Borden's head attorney. It seemed to be a little bit of a conflict of interest, right? A little bit. Maybe they're connected. Maybe the two things are connected, because you guys know I don't believe in coincidences, and I think it definitely had something to do with it. Let me know in the comments what you think, but I think it definitely did. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before coming back and giving Lizzie Borden her not guilty verdict. It was said that they pretty much decided right away, but they stayed away for 90 minutes so that it appeared that they were talking about it and giving it real thought, but they kind of knew already. They weren't gonna say she was guilty and put her to death because she would have been facing the hangman's noose. Apparently, the last woman to be executed in Massachusetts was also the first woman to be executed in the United States after the Declaration of Independence. In 1778, a young woman named Bathsheba Spooner was hanged after being found guilty for having her husband murdered so she could be with her lover. She told them that she was pregnant and begged for a stay in her execution so the baby could be born. She was actually examined by, I think, 16 midwives who all said she was not with child. After she was hanged, they did a post-mortem examination on her and found that she was, in fact, pregnant, 5 months along, with a perfect male fetus. So, I mean, we're talking over 100 years later at this point, and Massachusetts had still not executed another woman because they were a little gun shy from that incident. And I don't think they were itching to change their policy now. People in Fall River were shocked and scandalized when Lizzie Borden was acquitted, and then when she decided she wasn't going to leave town, she wasn't going to hide and run away with her tail between her legs. She was going to take up residence right in Fall River, her hometown. She wasn't leaving. Edwin H. Porter, a reporter for the Fall River Daily Globe, wrote and published a book called The Fall River Tragedy, A History of the Borden Murders. Edwin, that title's going to get you demonetized. This was released the same year she went to trial and was acquitted. It was Porter's opinion that she was guilty, and he sold as many copies as he could for $1.50 a pop. The people who had been friendly with her and respected her beforehand, they now shunned her. The Christian Endeavor Society, a group she had been both secretary and treasury of, they basically dropped her. They ignored her, much the same as she had shunned and ignored Abby's family on the street. Now the same was being done to her. Any visitor who came into town or close to Fall River, they found a way to make a trip to the murder house, the Abby Borden murder house. They wanted to stand outside and look at the place where such a tragedy had happened and where they believed a murderer still lived. Between the gossip and the constant looky-loos hanging out outside their house, taking pictures, probably taking selfies back in the day, just, like, oh, 2nd Street house. Smile, Martha. They were done. They had to leave. Emma and Lizzie were like, okay, we gotta go. But where, right? Where are they gonna go? They don't want to leave Fall River. At least Lizzie didn't. I think it was a pride thing at this point. She maybe felt that leaving her hometown would suggest she had done something wrong and she had something to run from. So they weren't going to leave Fall River, so where were they going to live? On August 10th, 1893, 3 weeks after her acquittal, Lizzie Borden finally got her coveted house in the Hill. She and her sister Emma purchased a mansion at number 7 French Street for $13,000. Can you imagine buying a mansion for $13,000? Like these days, $13,000 isn't even enough for a down payment. And I know the money's different, right? $13,000 today was worth way more back in the 1890s, but still, just can you imagine? But the new high society neighbors weren't exactly pleased to see the Borden sisters move in. Some said it was because they didn't want the publicity and the media frenzy that seemed to follow them everywhere to follow them into their coveted and quiet and respectable neighborhood. Others said they just didn't want a murderer living in their neighborhood. Lizzie was 32 years old. She should have been hanging out with her friends, having tea, playing cards, teaching Sunday school, leading Bible studies, just being a normal young lady in that day and age. She should have been feeling happy to finally have the caliber of home she wanted in the fancy neighborhood she had always looked up at and envied. But the price for everything she wanted, the price for the money in the house, and the price for that was loneliness and exile. The sisters still had each other, but for the time being, that was all they had. On May 6th, 1899, 6 years after her acquittal, Lizzie made a report to the police station saying that some kids were throwing gravel at her windows. In 1902, the kids trampled through her yard and her gardens. They threw rotten eggs at her house, and they would ring her doorbell late at night. Hilda Gifford, the daughter of the town jeweler, said that every Halloween, the kids would all pull straws and the loser had to go up and ring the doorbell on Lizzie Borden's house. And of course, there was that incessant jump rope song. Yes, that song did come out when Lizzie was still alive. And she would have to walk through the streets hearing children jumping rope to that. In 1905, she changed her name to Lisbeth. And I'm not sure what she was trying to accomplish from that. I mean, she still lived in the same place. Everybody knew who she was, what she looked like, where she lived. I think it was more a change of her trying to distance herself from the past and who she had been. This woman who had been stuck and been a victim of her circumstances. A woman who had been unhappy with her life, who had felt that she didn't have control over her path. This new Lisbeth would be the person who was financially independent, could travel, could do whatever they wanted. So the change in name, I believe, was more a personal choice rather than to hide from anyone. For almost 12 years, it was just Lizzie and Emma, as it had been in the beginning. And Emma didn't mind this. Emma was sort of a more introverted kind of person. Emma liked to stay home and sew and read and talk with her sister. But Lizzie was more outgoing. She had been trapped and cooped up so long in her house with her dad and her stepmother. She wanted to get out there and meet new people and see things. She wanted to go to the theater. She wanted to go to art galleries. She wanted to experience culture. She wanted to go to Boston and to parties and spend some of that money that she'd earned. I'm sorry, I had to. At one of these parties in Boston, Lizzie met Nance O'Neill. Nance O'Neill was an actress, and she was a stage and film actress, and she'd made quite a name for herself. Lizzie was a big fan because Lizzie spent a lot of time at the theater. She was a big fan of Nance, and when she met her in person, the two pretty much clicked. Lizzie, of course, was thrilled with this new friendship. This was her life as she'd always seen it. Rubbing elbows with artists and movie stars, being invited to all the parties, bright lights, big city, everybody watching her, wondering who is she, who's she with, what's she doing. That's kind of what she always wanted, to be somebody who was considered important. And it seemed as if Nance thought pretty highly of Lizzie as well. She referred to Lizzie as an attractive and exceedingly well-versed conversant. When she met Lizzie Borden, she didn't have a lot of money, and her new friend, who was hungry for companionship, had nothing but money. In 1905, excited to have a friend like Nance and to show her off to the close-minded people of Fall River, Lizzie Borden threw a party for Nance O'Neill at their new home in the Hill, a place she had started calling Maplecroft. The town was not impressed. At this time, actresses in these conservative-minded, close-minded people, actresses were no better than prostitutes. And they all suspected, and there was a rumor going around, that the friendship between Nance and Lizzie was more than a friendship, if you know what I mean. They were not the only ones who disapproved of Lizzie and Nance's relationship. And in the same year, 1905, Emma Borden moved out of Maplecroft. Lizzie paid Emma $150 every 6 months for use and occupancy of the home, and they never saw each other or spoke to each other after that. This is, I think, to me, one of the saddest parts of this whole story. Because I have a sister. And I'm 7 years older than my sister, so I kind of see the feeling that Emma had wanting to care for Lizzie, feeling like a mother figure to her. And my sister and I are very, very close, as I think Lizzie and Emma were very, very close throughout their whole lives. Even if I got into an argument with my sister, or we disagreed on something, I cannot imagine going the rest of my life without seeing her or speaking to her. It wouldn't happen. I don't think there's anything she could do that would cause me to not want to see her or speak to her ever again. So what happened? What happened that was bad enough for Emma Borden to say, I'm done? This relationship that started with such good intentions, a promise made to the mother they shared to always care for baby Lizzie, but Lizzie wasn't a baby anymore. And apparently there was things going on at Maplecroft that Emma Borden just couldn't stomach anymore. In an interview that Emma gave in 1913, she said, "The happenings at the French Street house that caused me to leave, I must refuse to talk about. I did not go until the conditions became unbearable." Emma Borden knows how to bring the tea to a boil but not spill it. She left us all hanging, right? Like, what? Can you give us a hint? What was unbearable? What could have been so unbearable that you don't talk to your sister anymore, who you have been by her side Every moment from the day she was born to when she was on trial for murder. What happened, Emma? Please tell us. But Emma never did. Emma never did, and she did go to her deathbed insisting her sister was innocent of the murders. So if Lizzie did kill her parents and Emma knew about it, she never told a soul. And maybe the rumors about Nance and Lizzie were true. And conservative Emma just didn't want to be any part of that. You know, maybe she witnessed what was happening. Maybe she was uncomfortable with it because, you know, they were very religious and she had to get away from it. I mean, in any event, the relationship between Nance and Lizzie, whatever it was, ended 2 years after the party. Or maybe Emma saw all these new friends of Lizzie's, all these artists and movie stars, starving artists and starving movie stars, possibly using her sister as their meal ticket. I guess we'll never know. We can only speculate, and I do. Lizzie didn't let the break with her sister stop her fabulous life. She traveled all over and she stayed in 4-star hotels. She went to the theater. She was a patron of the arts. At home, she hired a very close group of servants that became her friends and her family. The most notable of which being her driver. His name was Ernest Terry. He was her employee, but he also became a very close friend to her. In early 1926, Lizzie Borden's health began to fade, and she died at home surrounded by her close friends and her servants on June 1st, 1927, just a month before her 67th birthday. Her sister Emma was not present, but Emma died just 9 days later at home in her own bed. 9 days later. They were almost 10 years apart. They died 9 days apart. At the time of her death, Lizzie Borden was worth about $5 million in today's money. It would have been about $310,000 the year of her death. In her will, she left the city of Fall River $500 to continue maintaining and care for Andrew Borden's grave. She left $3,000 to her housekeeper and each one of her servants. That was a lot of money. That would be $42,000 in 2019. She left the Fall River Animal Rescue League $30,000, which would be $421,000 today. She said, "I have been so fond of animals, and their need is so great, and there are so few who care for them." She left $2,000 to her driver, Ernest, another $2,000 to his daughter, Grace, and another $2,000 to his wife, Ellen. So that would be about $84,000 that she left to this family in her will, in today's money. She also left Ernest Terry a lot west of her home that she owned and she had purchased, so he could use that or sell it, whatever he wanted to do. Before she died, she'd made a promise to Ernest Terry. He had some repairs he needed done on his home that he couldn't afford, and she said she promised she would pay for them. So before she died, she handed him a blank check, signed it, and said, "Go take this for whatever you need, cash it at the bank, and get your repairs done." And she left a man named Charles Cook $10,000. That would be $140,000 today. Charles was a business associate of her father's, and he had also become a financial advisor to both her and Emma in the days after Andrew's death. But apparently, the amount of money Lizzie left in her will wasn't enough for Charles Cook because he became involved in a scandal. He was actually the executor of her will, and it became an issue when everybody realized he hadn't included another home that Lizzie owned into her estate. This was at 328 French Street, and it was called Henry House. He claimed Lizzie had gifted him this home, and he'd already sold it, so he didn't include it in the estate. There were two women who were pretty close with Lizzie that contested this and basically accused him of fraud and took him to court. Helen Leeton, who was 7 years younger than Lizzie, she was also the president of the Fall River Animal Rescue League, and she'd met Lizzie several years before when she'd basically approached her and asked her for money to help build the Animal League when it was just getting started up. And she and Lizzie became friends and bonded through their love of animals and love of charitable donations and things like that. And Grace Hartley Howe, who was Lizzie's cousin, and she had inherited her half of Maplecroft because half of it was Emma's. So Grace inherited Lizzie's half of Maplecroft. So if the house was sold, she would get half of the profits. When they first said half of Lizzie's house, when I was reading it, in my head, I just, knowing better, but in my head I saw half of the house split, and she would go in and she could only live in half the house. She couldn't go onto the other half because it didn't belong to her. I'm so silly. Anyways, they took him to court. Charles Cook was ordered to pay back the money that he had gained from the sale of Henry House and put that money back into the estate. Greedy, greedy. And Charles Cook also tried to tell Ernest Terry that the money from the blank check Lizzie had given him was supposed to come out of the $2,000 she'd bequeathed him in her will, which he didn't get away with that either, but like, come on, dude. Okay, so let's quickly talk about some possible theories of who else could have killed Abby. And I'm not going to go in depth into these theories because I don't really believe any of them. You can look into them if you want, but I have my own theory of what happened, which I will tell you after. First, John Vinicum Morse is thought to have killed Andrew and Abby. And this is ridiculous. He had no reason to kill Abby, number one. Number two, apparently the night before, some people said they were arguing about a business venture they'd gone on together where John had lost some money and he was mad enough to axe someone to death. Like, that's not going to get your money back. He didn't have any monetary gain from killing Andrew, so the only reason he would have killed Andrew would have been out of anger because they lost money in an investment. I guess John Morse was a butcher by trade, and he would often walk around with a cleaver, like he carried it with him everywhere, so he would have had the knowledge it took to chop somebody's face up. Anybody could do that. I mean, honestly, I know it probably is hard to hit the same spot over and over again, and they always say Lizzie or whoever axed them to death, but it wasn't really an axe. It's more likely it was a hatchet or a more handheld thing, like with a shorter handle, which does make it easier to hit the same spot twice, especially if you're a little closer. And honestly, I don't think it takes a lot of skill to kill somebody with a hatchet or a cleaver. I think it just takes a lot of anger and preparation. Basically, people say his alibi was too airtight. He knew too much. He knew where he was, almost as if he had planned it, as if he knew he would have to have an alibi, so he planned it. I don't think he did this at all. People are motivated by greed and money, especially in this case when John and Andrew were friends and were partners in some business ventures. It wouldn't make sense for John to kill Andrew if he didn't benefit or gain money from it somehow, and he didn't. And even if he was mad at Andrew, why would he kill Abby? There's no reason for that. There's no reason for that. Some people say John helped Lizzie because he knew the monetary gain would go to his nieces. Once again, that doesn't make any sense. Why are you putting so much risk on yourself when you're not getting any of the reward? William Borden. It's said that Andrew Borden had an illegitimate son, and Andrew supposedly had this illegitimate son named William Borden back in the day when Andrew and Sarah were married, and Andrew's brother was married to a woman named Phoebe. So apparently Andrew and Phoebe had an affair. They had this love child that they then had to all like stow him away so nobody would find out about him. But then why did you give him the last name Borden if you didn't want anybody to find out about him? Why didn't you call him William Snow, like in Game of Thrones? This man, if in fact he was Andrew's son, everybody knew about him in the family. It was like a family secret. They all made efforts to keep it hidden away. Nobody ever told any outsiders. However, I guess the man's wife came forward after he committed suicide, and she said he had told her he was the son of Andrew Borden. This is all just speculation and rumors. There's absolutely no proof of this person existing, and if he did exist, there's no proof that he was Andrew Borden's son. This William Borden person apparently hung himself from an apple tree in East Taunton, Massachusetts, which isn't far from Fall River, in 1901. An intruder or an enemy? I don't believe there was an intruder. I don't believe there was an enemy. We already talked a little bit about that. The house was locked up tight. Nothing was touched. Nothing was moved. Nothing was taken. Somebody would have had to literally have hid in the house for 90 minutes. They would have had to have been familiar with the home to know where to hide, that somebody wouldn't have found them. They would have had to have gotten out so quickly so nobody could see them after they killed Abby and Andrew. It's just not possible, really. It's not. There's also theories that Lizzie did do it, but she had other reasonings. Some people think she was a victim of incest, that her father had been abusing her for many, many years, and she had battered child syndrome, so eventually she just fought back and murdered him. And she murdered Abby because not only did she hate Abby, but she was jealous of Abby because of Abby's place in her father's life. This is a girl who had been sexually abused for years and years and years, so she was confused. She would go between loving and hating her father, wanting him dead and wanting him all to herself. This is the theory. This is a very popular theory because it's scandalous and people love scandalous theories. There's absolutely no proof that Andrew Borden ever laid a hand on his daughters in any way, shape, or form. I think it just makes a good story. And it also paints Lizzie as more of a victim who wouldn't kill her parents for no reason and who had her own reasons for it. What I believe is Lizzie did this, and she did it for money. Her motive's pretty clear. I think that more people knew that she did it than we think, though. I think Lizzie had the help of Dr. Bowen and Bridget, especially Bridget. I believe Bridget covered for Lizzie. Bridget testified at the inquest, but her testimony is gone, missing. Nobody's ever found it. And on her deathbed, Bridget confessed to her sister that she had changed her testimony from the inquest to the trial to protect Lizzie Borden. What would you have to protect Lizzie from? It would have been pretty impossible for Lizzie to have killed her father and changed out of a dress that was most likely covered in blood before calling Bridget down and saying something happened to father. A lot of people think maybe Lizzie killed Abby and Andrew like naked or in her underwear. But I don't think so. I think she did it. Maybe she put an apron on or something. But after she did it, her and Bridget got all the clothes off, changed her into something, wrapped everything up really tight, and put them to soak in the basement. The rags in the basement, where Lizzie would then tell the police they were her rags from it being her time of the month that she used to clean up. I think maybe she did use that hatchet that the handle was broken off of. And I think that she was probably keeping it on her person when the police were searching her house. At this time, if you're a male police officer and there's no female police officers, you're not going into a crime scene and patting down a woman to see if she has a murder weapon on her. You're not going to do that. It was not respectable. It would just be something you would not do. And she knew that. So I believe she had the murder weapon on her. I believe it might have been that hatchet with the handle broken off of. And I believe that night what she was doing in the cellar was she was washing it, making sure all the blood was off. And she was probably like rubbing it on the floor where there was dust, trying to make it look as if it was dusty, probably when it was still wet from washing it. And then she put it into the toolbox, which means the first time they searched, they didn't find it. That's why it wasn't there the first time, because she had placed it there that night. That's what she was doing in the cellar. Then she was burning her dress, the one that she had gotten off of her with Bridget's help and hidden with Bridget's help, and she was burning it. And she had a completely different dress on when everybody else showed up. I think it would have been pretty impossible for Lizzie to have killed both Abby and Andrew in the house without Bridget knowing about it, without Bridget hearing something, without Bridget seeing something. So I do believe that Bridget, maybe out of fear, maybe out of care for Lizzie, I think she covered for her. I also think Lizzie's doctor covered for her too. I think that that's why he dosed her with so much morphine, or said he did at least, so that it would seem as if she wasn't fit to actually give testimony. And the police saw Dr. Bowen with his notepad because he had taken some notes when he first came to the house. He took a couple pieces of paper out of the notepad and he threw them in the fire. What were on those pages? I'd love to know. What about you? Additionally, many years later, a young boy was trying to recover a ball from the roof of a house that was next door to the Borden's house on 2nd Street. While he was up there, he found a hatchet. This hatchet was old, like it'd been up there for a while, but underneath it, you could see a glimmer, like it was a new hatchet, like it hadn't really been used before it had been thrown up there. And this glimmer, it's called gilt. It's what new tools, I think, have on them before they get used and rusted and old. What was important about that was Abby Borden, who was killed first, had a piece of this gilt in her skull. And the medical examiner thought she'd been killed with a hatchet that had recently been purchased. So I think it's also possible that Lizzie could have used that hatchet, one that had just been purchased, and thrown it up on the roof of the next door neighbor's house afterwards. And that's why no murder weapon was found. Either way, I think it was Lizzie Borden. I don't think there's any doubt that it could have been anybody else. What is really cool though is you can still visit Fall River, Massachusetts, and you can stay at the Lizzie Borden house on 2nd Street. It's a bed and breakfast now. And they do really cool like reenactments and stuff every year. It looks awesome. You can spend the night there. How fun would that be? I want to do it and vlog it so bad. I want to do it so bad. So you can actually spend the night there. It sounds awesome. And Maplecroft was also just purchased by the same owners of the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast, and they are going to be turning that into a bed and breakfast as well. You can stay there too. I mean, this is the coolest thing ever. I've got to get to Massachusetts immediately. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Did Lizzie Borden do it? Did she not? Who else could it have been? No one? Also, some quick channel news. This is probably not going to interest any of you who are here specifically for true crime stuff, but I've gotten so many questions about makeup and skincare recently, asking me to do a video, and I haven't wanted to because I know that the majority of people here don't want to see that. But I am going to make a video probably next week. It's just going to be a little extra video. It won't take away from a true crime video, but it will be about my favorite makeup and skincare that I've been using and what I think about it lately and how I use it and everything. And I will put that up for you guys, so whoever wants to watch it, watch it. But if you're not interested in it, don't click on it, because I don't want to see any comments from people who click on it seeing that the title says like makeup and skincare, and people in the comments saying like, I don't want this, I want true crime content. If you don't want to watch it, do not click on it. I just want to give the subscribers out there who want to see that kind of stuff, I want to give them that option to see it, because, you know, I've been asked, so I want to do it for you guys. The ones who want to see it, not the ones who want to complain about seeing it. All right, guys, stay kind and stay beautiful. I've got to get this edited because I really want to have this up for you tomorrow. I really, really want to have this up for you tomorrow, and I still have to edit the Q&A that Adam and I recorded yesterday evening, so that's up this week as well. So I've got a lot of work ahead of me, and I don't have a lot of time to do it because I have like an hour. I love you guys so much. Stay kind and stay beautiful and have a wonderful day. Bye.